Who said the lawyers at the Attorney General's chambers are incompetent and lazy? Last night, Mala was upset. She was reading Mr. Thomas's book called My Story, Justice in the Wilderness. Pointing to page 236, she said, "This doesn't sound right. What are you going to do about it?" There, Tansri Thomas says, "I realized that lawyers from the Attorney General's chambers did not have the same commitment, passion, and drive to succeed as their counterparts in the bar. Public sector lawyers," said he, "had public service attitude. They are civil servants earning a fixed monthly income, awaiting pension upon retirement. There was no incentive," said Tansri Thomas, "to distinguish themselves. The emergence of the best and the brightest stars in the private litigation bar had no equivalent in the Attorney General's chambers," he says, "at least to an outside observer. The Attorney General's lawyers," says he, "seemed to serve in a large bureaucracy. Over time, after many promotions, some were appointed to the bench." The purpose of this passage seems to suggest that members of the AGC were not as good as lawyers in the Malaysian bar. That is not, I repeat, that is not true at all. Yet many politicians of race-based parties have seized this passage to show that members of the AGC were alleged to be both stupid and lazy. I deny that. I have worked against AGC counsel in many cases. In these years, I've got to know about 44 of them. What has been my impression? I will, as usual, demonstrate that in a story. In the year 2007, I was asked to defend a group of Hindraf detainees at the Selayang Sessions Court. The situation at the court was a powder keg ready to explode. A strong contingent of police officers was present. Large groups of people had gathered at the court foyer. Most were ethnic Indians, and the 15 counsel for the detainees, when I arrived, were livid. By then, newspapers were awash with allegations of racial oppression and other nasty concoctions. It was hard to differentiate between truth and propaganda. Feelings were running high. The question in the court was whether bail should be granted and what charges the accused were to be indicted with. The AGC team was led by a gentleman, DPP Awang Armadajaya. We conferred. He was, every inch of him, an aristocratic gentleman. He worked hard to ensure that our clients' needs were met. The Sessions Court judge took a seat. Both sides put forth powerful arguments. Bail was granted. The judge transferred the case to the Shah Alam Sessions Court at the request of the prosecution. They were entitled to ask for that. When I arrived at the Shah Alam High Court, the then Attorney General himself, Tan Sri Gani Patel, had turned up. The situation there was worse than Selayang. By this time, the entire foreign press had mobbed the court. It was difficult to get in. There were about 60 counsel for the detainees. The number had inflated. Most lawyers sat cross-legged on the floor. Those addressing arguments were allowed to stand as usual. There were 166 detainees. Added to that were wailing family members. Add to those who had come to post bail, if any were to be granted. Several counsel spoke. The arguments were fierce. Emotional arguments were raised, unfortunately, mostly from other counsel from our side. One at a time, multiple primary charges and alternative charges were read and confirmed. Arguments were fierce. They ran up until 9:45. We had to take recesses several times, mostly for prayer breaks. I think it was the longest remand hearing in Malaysian history. By 9:30 p.m. on the first day, everyone was exhausted. No one had so much as a glass of water. I leaned across to the Attorney General and pointed to the accused. Not a single one of them had eaten. To his credit, the Attorney General put his hands into his pocket and took out a thick wad of notes. He handed it to the police officers and asked them to buy food for the detainees. A break was granted. The accused were allowed to have their dinner. In the course of the next 6 months, Tan Sri Gani Patel worked with me to grant bail to the accused on the most favourable of terms. Sometimes bail payments were made in installments, as much as RM50 a month. Imagine that. The quality of the AGC's arguments was calm, organized and professional. The AGC team extended many kindnesses to the accused, as they should have. They were courteous to us to the point of being sympathetic to all our demands. A member of the prosecution team, Dato Yusuf, then the Solicitor General No. 2, took me aside. He pointed to a penal code section and asked me to invoke that section in order to take an alternative, easier path for my client. It was a great revelation. Of the 320 arrested in Batu Caves, 166 were charged. Most were released. Only 4 went on to the end of trial. My colleagues, Mr. Augustine Anthony, Mr. Karthigesan, Ms. K. and Geeta, Mr. Vijay, Mr. Vibalanathan and Mr. Puthan saw it to the end. In another Bursay case, shortly afterwards, when various members of the past delegation were arrested, the AG again appeared against us. We argued passionately. The court, however, granted bail. At no time was the Attorney General's chambers, the AG himself, were ever improper towards the defense team or to the accused. When the ruling government makes very difficult decisions, it is the members of the AGC who face the brunt of all the anger in court. In every such occasion, these AGC officers spend many long, sleepless nights preparing for the cases. We defense counsel know it's not easy to break the wall of the AGC prosecution team. For all this slogging, AGC lawyers do not get paid any more than their monthly salary. They do work at great personal risk. When they fight to enforce the law against crime, many AGC officers have been and to this day are being threatened with death or severe personal injury. Do you remember how DPP Kevin Marias met his end? That's only one example. I could cite many others. Have members of the AGC ever complained to you about all that? AGC officers, like you and I, have families and children to look after. Even then, they spend very long hours going over the details of cases. On the many occasions that I have had the opportunity to appear against AGC officers in capital offence cases, civil matters, on Societies Act disputes, on election petitions and land acquisition cases, every single AGC officer that I have met has behaved with the greatest courtesy. Of course, in the clamour of battle, we have often exchanged heated words. Nobody took it to heart, returned home and came back the very next day to put the best arguments forth for each side. AGC officers consider it their duty to protect and enforce the law. Sometimes they see our clients, those whom we defend, as lawbreakers who must be brought to book. Can we blame them for slogging to secure a conviction? If every AGC officer who secures a conviction is to be seen in poor light, where would our justice system be? Therefore, Tan Sri Thomas's allegation that AGC officers have no passion or drive to succeed compared to their counterparts in the bar, I'm afraid, is not borne out by the facts. It's a great disservice to the AGC officers to say that AGC lawyers exhibit public service attitude. My own experience has shown the opposite. Just because AGC officers were civil servants earning a fixed monthly income, as he says, and awaiting pension upon retirement, which is, by the way, their right, doesn't mean that they are lazy or incompetent or had prepared for cases ineffectively. That's not fair. In the years that I've worked with members of the AGC, I have found them to be exceedingly bright and hard-working. Like all bodies of men and women, in every organization, in every jurisdiction, there are good people there are average members, and of course, there are rotten apples. I know lawyers at the Malaysian bar who have the same qualities that Tan Sri Thomas alleges. Do we have lawyers in the Malaysian bar who are incompetent and lazy? How can I say no? That would be untruthful. Members of the Malaysian bar and members of the law societies of Sabah and Sarawak and members of the AGC and finally the institution of the judiciary form the three sides of the same legal edifice that renders justice to the nation. One cannot exist without the other. If one eye bleeds, can the other be happy? When the one limb is under attack, it hurts all other members of the body. Would you not use the one arm to protect the other if you came under attack? It therefore behooves every lawyer to come to the aid of the besieged Attorney General's chambers. Those who attack the Attorney General's chambers encourage political and racial division, exactly what some racist politicians desire in their heart of heart. We lawyers should avoid this pitfall. We should stand together. I can say this to you, members of the Attorney General's chambers, confidently too. Every right-thinking member of the Malaysian bar and members of the Sabah and Sarawak bar stand in support of you. As we say in the Royal Military College, where I had the opportunity to train, up AGC. Good night.